Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for exploring the human-dog relationship through canine cartoons. This event is a partnership between the Billy Island Cartoon Library and Museum and the Center for Human-Animal Interactions Research and Education, or CHAIR, at The Ohio State University. I want to go over a few housekeeping tips before we get started. So this is a 45-minute presentation followed by a Q&A. You, the viewers, have been muted and we can't see you. Your video is off. And this presentation is being recorded for internal use. So just in case you're not familiar with Zoom, here's what you have access to. You can adjust audio settings at the bottom of your screen. You'll be able to chat. You can talk to other attendees or hosts. And we're going to ask that you submit any questions you have for the panelists in the Q&A tool. That way we'll be able to see them because it's often hard for us to dig through the chat to see them. So this is what you should be seeing on your screen, the audio settings down on the lower left. And then if you want to ask a question, down on the bottom, there's the Q&A feature. If you click that, you should see a window pop up. And then you'll type your question here. And then you should see, once you hit send, your question will pop up saying that you asked it. If you want to ask something anonymously, you can check that box to send the question anonymously. You also have access to the chat feature. If you click that, it will also pop up as a separate box. So I want to introduce the presenters for tonight. We have Brian Walker, who is a cartoonist, comics historian, and curator of the Dog Show, which is currently on display at the Billy Ireland Museum through October 31st. Also on display is Into the Swamp, the social and political satire of Walt Kelly's Pogo. So those are the two exhibits that are up now. And then our next presenter is Elizabeth Parker, who is the associate professor in the Department of Animal Sciences at The Ohio State University. Michelle Mullins, owner and director of training at Honest to Dog in Richmond, Virginia. Steve Hoyt, who is the director of training, certified orientation and mobility specialist with Pilot Dogs here in Columbus, Ohio. And Dr. Kelly Ann George, who is associate professor, professional practice in the Department of Animal Sciences at The Ohio State University and the co-director of the Center for Human-Animal Interactions Research and Education. So if you haven't had a chance to visit us yet and you are going to be in Columbus soon, you can stop in and view the dog show. It'll be up through October 31st. Now I'd like to hand it off to Brian Walker.
Hello, I'm the curator of the dog show, as you well know. The idea for this exhibit goes back to 2018, when the family of Brad Anderson, the creator of Marmaduke, oops, is that supposed to advance?
There we go.
Okay. The family of Brad Anderson, creator of Marmaduke, made a large donation to the museum. And they thought about doing a Marmaduke exhibit, but decided to expand it to include all cartoons in all different genres. Oops, it's not advancing. The exhibit explores the fascination that cartoonists have had with canines for over 200 years, starting with political cartoons from the early 19th century and going all the way up to graphic novels from the 21st century. The exhibit is broken up into different sections, starting with pioneering pups from the early comic strips, including Tige from Buster Brown, Officer Pup from Crazy Cat, and Daisy from Blondie. There are adventurous breeds like Sandy from Little Orphan Annie and Mug from Dick Tracy. Among the classic canines in comic strips are Snoopy from Peanuts, Otto from Beetle Bailey, Odie from Garfield, and Ruff from Dennis the Menace, and many, many more. There's also a section on famous dogs of animation that includes classic stars like Goofy, Pluto, Lady and the Tramp, and 101 Dalmatians from Disney, as well as other studios like Scooby-Doo from Hanna-Barbera and Underdog. Miscellaneous mutts includes George Booth's cartoons from the New Yorker with his scruffy dogs, alternative comics by Linda Barry, and a selection from Dave Pilkey, whose Dog Man graphic novel series is very popular right now. Among the highlights of the exhibit are the complete story of the death of Farley from Lynn Johnson's For Better For Worse. There's also a really charming story by Patrick McDonald from Mutts, in which Earl the dog and Mooch the cat switch personalities. There's a showcase of comic book covers that include such classic characters as Superman's Krypto, Lassie, and Hot Dog from the Archie comics. This exhibit has been a real crowd pleaser during the summer, but we also hope that it educates visitors of the important role that canines have played in American culture for over 200 years. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Liz, you're up.
Hi, everyone. So in this presentation, I'm actually going to turn my video off so you don't have to see my face. And in this presentation, we'll be talking about dog evolution. So a brief history of dog evolution and domestication. Next slide, please. So this little dog was they think Hesperocyaneae is the ancestor of all canids. So the Canidae family, or the canids, they originated about 50 million years ago, and they actually originated in North America. This little guy is the oldest and most primitive member of this family. And this subfamily included small to medium-sized predators, and they walked the earth for about 20 million years. So they lived in a forested environment. This was when the earth was quite warm. They were the size of small wolves, and their teeth, like all canids, were specialized for tearing raw flesh. So they had the canines, they had the carnassial teeth. Oh, sorry, next slide, please. Okay, yeah, so they lived in this forested environment. And then the next slide, please. So in this slide, we have two subfamilies of canids. So we saw the first one, which was that little Hesperocyaneae. In this one, we have the big dog there, the big canid there is Borophagus, or bone cracking dog. And the other small wolf-like canids, they're an early species of the subfamily Caninae. So Borophagus went extinct about 4 million years ago, but the Caninae subfamily, it emerged about 15 million years ago. So the two subfamilies probably competed against each other, but they also probably cooperated for millions of years. Now Caninae, the canines, they're the third and the only living subfamily of the canids. Next slide, please. So this guy, you might know the symbol. This is Canis dirus, probably one of the most famous extinct members of the subfamily Caninae. He had an estimated mass of about 130 to 150 pounds, which is about 25% heavier than the modern grey wolf, but is actually smaller than the fictional dire wolves that we saw in the TV Game of Thrones. So the largest known collection of dire wolf specimens were actually found in the North Florida region. Next slide, please. So this is Canis lupus, our modern day wolf. So, so it is a member of, just like the direwolf, is a member of the subfamily Caninae. Next slide, please. So all wolf-like canids, and our domestic dog is included in that group. They have 78 chromosomes. They can hybridize, meaning they can mate with each other and they can produce fertile offspring. So coyotes with wolves and coyotes with dogs and wolves with dogs as well. So you can get these hybrids that are fertile, they're able to produce offspring. They're not usually very viable though, because the different subspecies actually have different cultures. So they don't really compete in the wild at all. So the scientists used to call our domestic dog Canis familiaris. So it's the dog that's familiar with us. But scientists today think that Canis familiaris is just a subspecies of the wolf. So they call it today, they call it Canis lupus familiaris. So just an offshoot of the domestic, of the wild, the wolf. Okay, next slide, please. So the interesting thing is that researchers in the field of dog domestication, they now dismiss the theory that Neolithic man tamed the wolf and so developed the domesticated dog. And in fact, they now believe that the domestic dog domesticated itself. So when the hunter-gatherer transitioned to a more permanent lifestyle in the village, some wolves invaded that new niche to gain access to a new food source. The wolves with the shorter flight distances, the ones that were quite tame, they got the best pick of the food. And then those wolves, those tamer wolves, they got to mate with other tame wolves. And eventually we came up with this change in behavior that was also associated with a change in the appearance of the domestic dog. What was great is that the domestic dog was actually, the tamer wolves, they were also really territorial, as any canid is. They're very territorial and they protected that niche from other wolves and also from other humans. And the wolves that attacked the people in the village, of course, they were inevitably killed. So there was this process of natural selection going on. And this situation actually continues in dump sites all around the world still today. So next slide, please. So Ray Coppinger is a really famous researcher in the field of dog domestication. He says that there's about 1 billion domestic dogs in the world today, but only about 250 million of those are actually owned. The rest live on the streets in this sort of environment. So this is a village dogs in Thailand. I've seen these dogs in Thailand. I've seen dogs in Papua New Guinea, just like this. They almost all have this same appearance. They're usually medium to small. They're not too big. They're not too small. They tend to be a little bit larger in the cold climates compared to the tropical environments. And they have all different colored coats, but often they're this sandy. They have this sandy sort of beige appearance to them. They can have floppy ears, or they can have pricked ears. They can have curly, fluffy tails, or they can have just, normal straight tails. Next slide, please. So I thought that this was very interesting. The dingo is a really important part of Aboriginal culture, the native people of Australia. And dingoes were the only large placental mammal other than humans before the Europeans arrived in the 18th century. So other than the dingo, there was only marsupials. So the first human settlers of Australia, they arrived about 50,000 years ago, but they think that the first dingoes arrived by boat about 6,000 years ago in a single migration. So why is this important? Is because all So all other migrations of domestic dogs were about following humans across continents and land bridges. But the arrival of the dingo was purposeful, and it's an indication of how much they were valued. Turns out they didn't value the Aboriginal people as much, because when they arrived, they had easy pickings with our marsupials. They were just absolutely no competition for the dingoes. So the next slide, please. So dogs obviously have continued to evolve, but they've got many physiological, behavioural and morphological changes, often because in the last 200 years, we have, they've been bred like that with selective breeding. Next slide, please. So this is one of my favourite breeds of dogs. This is a Kelpie. And I think that the Australian sheep industry would have failed a long time ago without this little faithful companion. I believe, and a lot of researchers believe, that dogs actually ended up domesticating humans. They taught us to hunt more efficiently. They allowed us to herd animals in the most difficult of environments, on the sides of hills and places that wouldn't even be able to be accessed by a motorbike today. They were our eyes and our ears. They guarded us and our property. And so I sort of say, where would we be without them? And that's the end of my presentation, except for one last slide, which I found just recently. Yep. Okay. Actually, you haven't got that slide, so I will show it later. Thank you.
Now I'm introducing Michelle Mullins.
Just a moment, and I'm trying to see how my slide advances. Oh, there it goes. Was that you or me? Hopefully it was me. All right. Well, thank you so much for allowing me to explore this topic with all of you. As a trainer and a behavior consultant, I'll be looking at a piece of this exhibit that I chose through the lens of training and behavior, which clearly has changed throughout the years, as we now have more science about learning itself and how that relates to all learners, including our pet dogs. And I don't think my slides are advancing. Oh, there they go. Okay, sorry. So there were so many wonderful pieces in this collection. And as you can see from this picture, I have a longtime love of canines featured in various mediums, from comic strips, comics themselves, as well as movies. And thank you. From that training and behavior perspective, this particular comic strip really stood out for me. It's from the Family Circus comic, and the artist is Bill Keane. And this particular piece is dated January the 31st, 1970, which is makes it a little bit older than me, but not by much. And in it, the family pets are two dogs. One, the larger dog, is a Labrador, and his name is Barfy. He was apparently named by the children. And then there's the small shaggy-haired mutt. His name is Sam, and he is apparently a stray that the children brought home in the comic strip just a few days before this one. And in it, we can obviously see that Barfy is teaching Sam the rules of the house, right? So he's saying chewing is a no-no, begging at the table is a no-no, and sleeping on beds is definitely a no-no. And as you can see, all the children's toys are strewn around in the background, clearly delineating the children's toys, or the toys we're clearly talking about. So just kind of to give you just a quick, I want to talk a little bit, and can we go to the next slide? I don't think it's allowing me to advance these, or maybe I'm doing it wrong. Thank you. So when we look at dog training, as a whole, most people view it as a very simple model, similar to what we see here in this sketch. We have this young lady and she's teaching her dog to offer a paw or shake. And this, well, yes, this is absolutely an operant learning, ABC. We call it the antecedent behavior and the consequence. This is not even learning at its most basic, but this is what most people think of when you say dog training. So the antecedent would be her offering her paw, or possibly saying the word shake. And then the dog puts the paw in her hand, and I'm going to assume the consequence in this sketch is that she's going to give him a cookie, right? Because that's a very common consequence for that behavior. And the model being that the dog would offer that behavior more frequently in order to earn more cookies. So the reason I say it's not learning as its most basic is because there's this operant type of learning that you're seeing in the sketch, but then there's also what we call classical conditioning, which are really just those intrinsic associations that are being made while we learn. So whether the environment is nice, whether we enjoy it, whether we're scared or fearful, all those associations are happening when learning is taking place, and they happen all the time. So that's actually even, I think, more basic than this model. But this is what most people think of. But to be honest, actually, training can be a little bit more complex than that. Hopefully, if I can, there we go. Oh, now they're going too fast. And I'm just having a mess here. There we go. Sorry, my slides are a little all over the place. I apologize for that. But when we talk about these concepts and ethical structures, so we're looking at that classical conditioning piece, the operant conditioning. We also have some more advanced things that we look at, like counter conditioning, desensitization, that happen when we're talking about more advanced behavior work, whether you're working with dogs that might be fearful, reactive, or aggressive. Those are definitely going to come into play. And then we have the hierarchy of behavior change procedures here by Dr. Susan Friedman, which is a nice ethical guide to kind of help us make sure we're looking at things like wellness, physical issues, all those kind of things, nutrition that could be affecting learning. So we've got to work with veterinarians and other care providers to make sure that's being taken care of. We also want to make sure the environment is enriching and set up well for the animal, because if all of that stuff isn't in play, it's really hard to start in on that training process that people think of as dog training. So Anne, I'm going to go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Science has really moved us away from using punishment and aversive type training, which is wonderful because we've discovered, and I've cited a couple studies here. I didn't want to dive in too deep on this subject for this, but an example, we've discovered those types of things can decrease an animal's confidence, as well as lead to things like shyness, fearfulness, and aggression. So based on the science and the things we've learned from those studies, and can we advance to the next slide, please? We've really learned that focusing on a more positive reinforcement model and training to get behavior we want can not only be much more humane, but also more effective. So I always help my clients kind of frame it in the sense that they're going to see what their dog is actually capable of and discover their dog is capable of behavior that they like, not just behavior that they don't like. And I think two great examples of that a lot of people can relate to are when you get in a taxi, you certainly don't tell the taxi driver all of the places that you don't want to go, right? It's not efficient. They might think you're a little crazy. We actually just get in, tell them where we do want to go. It's much more effective that way. And then also when you go to a restaurant and order from your wait staff, you don't take the menu and list all the dishes that you don't want and leave them to guess which ones weren't on that list. You simply tell them what you do want. So that's kind of the focus of training nowadays. And the reason we're doing that is because the science is leading us in that direction. So I want to look at the cartoon real quickly as well. If it will advance to the next slide, please. We're going to talk about that chewing on toys is a no-no, right? Well, certainly in the cartoon, we're talking about children's toys, but back in the 70s, there weren't a ton of dog toys on the market. That has certainly changed. But we have to take a quick look at natural food acquisition. So if you think your cute little fluffy dog doesn't still have some of this built in, you'd probably be wrong. And in addition, we've really learned to respect what dogs are and what we've bred them to do. And part of it comes from this food acquisition chain where they see, hear, or smell something, they orient on it, they might stalk it and then chase it. They're going to grab and shake it, bring it down, kill it, dismember it, and eat it. And I know that sounds a little bit grim, but that's what happens, right? In that chain, there's also another process that Dr. Parker had alluded to, showing the picture of the dogs in what I believe were the dumps. I don't know what country that was in, but they're foraging for food there as well. And that's another way they would naturally get their food. Can we advance to the next slide, please? So now they have all their own toys, right? Having worked many years in the pet equipment and toy industries, I can attest to how toys are developed and designed. Can we go to the next slide, please? Toys should be based on one or more of the ways dogs would use their natural skills or behaviors. And so next time you're watching your dog playing with one of those dog toys that you've picked up, notice if it corresponds with anything in that food acquisition chain. We've all seen dogs who like to shake their toys. We've all seen dogs who want to grab and shake their toys, or stalk them and chase them. So all of that's very much in line with that chain that we just looked at. And if we go to the next slide, it shows a little bit about some of the foraging toys, puzzles, and snuffle mats where dogs can forage for their food a little bit. They really enjoy that enrichment. It's really important for them as well. If we could go to the next slide, please. Now we're going to look at just real quickly about that. Begging at the table is a no-no. When we look at that, it's funny to me nowadays because if you go to the next slide, one of the most common requests that trainers get from their clients now is that they want us to train their dogs to behave well in public spaces, such as outdoor restaurants, breweries, wineries, at festivals, where dogs are going to be faced with lots of food and drink, as well as other dogs in those situations. So one of the things we don't want them to beg at the table, but we're absolutely wanting to put them in those situations. And then finally, when we talk about sleeping on beds, right, as a no-no, sleeping on the bed, at some point, most of my clients admit they allow their dog to sleep on the bed. They almost always preface it with, I know I shouldn't, but, and they're very surprised to find out that my dogs sleep on the bed with me. So they've often heard it isn't appropriate from a training aspect or from other dog owners. However, I'd say for the vast majority of dogs, that no sleeping on the bed rule is really one of those that we can ignore. It doesn't make your dog dominant. It doesn't spoil them. It's really kind of an outdated thing, and that we know that it's not really true that it's going to do anything bad. However, you know, if the dog is resource guarding, territorial about the bed, something like that, or access to the bed causes a health issue for the owner or for the dog himself, like maybe he shouldn't be jumping off that height or that kind of thing. If there's a safety risk factor, we could definitely say that we would recommend not allowing them on the bed or teaching them to get down when asked. So I think that comic just has, those aspects of, the 1970s. It's definitely has those things that we have learned more about now and that we approach very differently from training and behavior. And I don't know if we lost the last couple of slides that went with that, but that's my final piece.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay, no problem.
Steve, I'm inviting you to turn on your video and microphone if you're ready.
Okay. Thank you. It's an honor and a privilege to be here, and thank you for having me come to speak on the working dogs and the human-dog bond. I am going to turn off my video for this presentation. Oh, sorry about that.
I helped you out for a moment.
Next slide, please. Types of working dogs. There's therapy dogs, police dogs, military working dogs, detection dogs, search and rescue dogs, herding dogs, and of course, service dogs. And I will be focusing on definitely on service dogs. Next slide, please. Autism service dogs are trained to help people navigate social settings. Hearing dogs assist their deaf and hard hearing partners. When the dog hears a particular cue, they alert their owner and lead them towards the noise. Diabetic alert dogs are specifically trained to alert their person to potentially deadly blood sugar highs, hyperglycemia, and lows, hypoglycemia. Seizure response dogs assist individuals before, during, and after a seizure. Allergy detection dogs are specially trained to detect and alert to the odor of allergens such as peanuts, gluten, or eggs. Next slide, please. Types of service dogs. Mobility assistance dogs. They help them perform everyday tasks. This includes retrieving objects, opening doors, pressing automatic door buttons, and turning on lights and turning off lights. PTS dogs, service dogs, psychiatric service dogs are specifically trained to help individuals who suffer from things like depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And of course, guide dogs, or if you want to be politically correct, you say dog guides, or of course, everybody knows them as seeing eye dogs. Guide dogs are trained to guide their handlers who are blind or visually impaired along their desired path of relatively straight lines, to cross streets, to protect their handlers from making contact with obstacles, including those above the dog's head, to alert their handler to surface changes, such as curbs and steps, to recognize destinations, and to intellectually disobey unsafe commands and to use initiative and problem-solving skills. Next slide, please. What is a service dog? According to the Americans with Disabilities Act, service dogs are especially trained to perform specific tasks for people with disabilities. These disabilities can be physical, sensory, psychiatric, intellectual, or mental. Next slide, please. What does bonding mean? The formation of a close relationship as between a mother and child or between a person and an animal, especially through frequent or constant association. That's the Webster's Dictionary. Dogs are bonded with you when the dogs make eye contact with you, check in with you, are happy to see you, are relaxed with you, snuggle your stuff, listen and respond to you, and seek out your affection. Next slide, please. What is bonding between humans and dogs? Human canine bonding was recognized by Boris M. Levinson, who had an immense influence on the establishment of the field of study. Levinson is known for accidentally discovering the benefits of assisted pet therapy. He found that withdrawn and uncommunicative children would interact positively whenever he brought his dog Jingles to their therapy sessions. Next slide, please. Where did man's best friend come from? In fact, the phrase man's best friend originated in the American Supreme Court in 1870 when a talented lawyer named George Graham Vest defended a man who deeply loved his coonhound named Old Drum. Vest argued that when a neighbor killed Old Drum for trespassing, the neighbor took the life of more than just a pet. He killed an important family member. Vest famously stated, "The one absolute unselfish friend that man can have in this selfish world, the one that never proves ungrateful or treacherous, is his dog." Next slide, please. The bond between dogs and humans. Through the ages, people have claimed dogs as one of their closest and best companions. Of all the domesticated animals, dogs serve the widest arrays of roles: protector, helper, lifesaver, and companion. Next slide, please. Guide dogs, or seeing eye dogs, are dog guides. 4 paws, 2 feet, 1 team. Mike Hinkson and Roselle, we just celebrated the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And if you great book to read, it's called Thunder Dog. And I got to give Roselle a hug when Mike came to our school and took off the dog's harness because of what Roselle meant to Mike and the teamwork they had, trust on 9/11. And I love the cartoon to the right. I told you not to call me at work, Denise, because the dog is in harness working. Next slide, please. Guide dogs are not only their eyes of a person who is without sight, but they're also their companionship. I will teach people the white cane, and I've yet to hear someone say to me that the white cane is a good companion to them. Next, I'm going to show the video of myself under blindfold, sleep shade in downtown Columbus working Petunia. Okay, go ahead, please, the video. Next slide, please. Thank you. And dogs have proven themselves time and time to be loyal, kind, understanding, and have an indomitable spirit. They greet us happily after what may have been the worst day of our lives and make us feel better with a wag of their tail and a playful grin. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. And hopefully I will be able to get the slides to advance here, but if not, Anne, hopefully you'll be there to help me. So let's give it a shot. Maybe I'll ask Anne to go ahead, please. Thank you. So what I would like to do is just kind of wrap up what we've been talking about the human-dog relationship. And think a little bit, we started with Dr. Parker talking to us about the very earliest forms of relationship. And I'd like to kind of wrap this up by thinking about where we are today and where we might go in the future. So I do have to brag a little bit. The photos there are of my grandsons with their dog Rascal. And you probably have some similar shots of your own if you think about your dog who is probably part of your family, and that's a little bit what we're going to talk about. So Anne, if you could please advance the slide. So to connect it to some of the comics that you will see if you do get a chance to come and view the exhibit, it's an amazing exhibition, but I pulled these two in particular to think about how we've moved from, having dogs to serve simply the function or a service within our social structure, if you will. So if you think about the Dick Tracy comic there on the left, where he's having, Mug, who was definitely there. I saw on the chat, there was a question about particular breeds and so forth. So this is obviously a breed that would have been used in this case for protection, and thinking about how we did selectively breed for particular behaviors and maybe particular characteristics of the dog. And then all the way to, again, thinking about my grandsons, but thinking about family, right? And the family circus. I know Michelle brought up the family circus as well, but just thinking about how, how the animals have how our dog relationship has certainly changed over the years and over the decades. And I think that you'll find that in this exhibit, you can definitely see how that it's reflected in the different types of comics and cartoons that you'll see. So go ahead, please, and switch the slide. So what I want to talk a little bit more about, though, is how that also affects seeing these images and seeing the way that dogs are oftentimes portrayed for us in some of our media. We think about this term anthropomorphism, right? Where we've given these human characteristics to a lot of our animals. And some of us would maybe argue against me to say that, well, certainly the dog is feeling and thinking and doing certain things because we feel that closely related or closely bonded with those animals. But I will say that, as we see these images come through, we see, for instance, the image there on the left is actually from All Dogs Go to Heaven, which was very popular when my children were younger. And, just thinking about, again, how, the orphan was kind of, I guess I will say, befriended by the two mutts, and then Charlie being one of them for All Dogs Go to Heaven, right? And Scratchy, or I can't remember the name of the other character, excuse me. But thinking about how, again, they formed a family unit. And then all the way over to, of course, who can't resist the beautiful image of Lady and the Tramp, who, of course, have their romantic dinner together. And they even have the human that comes out and provides the music and the atmosphere for them, right? The famous kiss of Lady and the Tramp. So when we think about how these images reflect and kind of shape the way that we have certain expectations then for our animals. So coming back to a little bit of what Michelle was talking about, we we kind of expect our animals, our dogs in particular, to be able to go everywhere with us and to be able to know how to, you know, what the social norm is for that particular atmosphere, whether it be a microbrew patio or inside a restaurant or what have you. And I think a lot of that, you know, comes from these kinds of images that we have had. And it's kind of shaped the way that we expect our animals to behave, or that we want them trained to behave in those particular cases. I think you can probably go to the next slide, please. So where I'm going with this is to try to think about what kind of selective pressures have we put on our canine companions, and what effect that has had on some of these particular breeds. So, you know, if we think about, as an example, these are just examples here of the Shar-Pei, recognizing that, you know, we see a lot of skin disorders and a lot of issues as a result of selecting for particular traits that we find attractive, or that we find cute, or that we find to be maybe unique and offer us opportunities for, you know, some kind of, I guess I will say, special, if you will, specialized animal. And then all the way also to thinking about dogs that, again, were maybe bred for particular function, but now that they're not performing in those particular roles. Certainly we do still have working animals, as Dr. Parker had pointed out, and thinking about with our livestock and other species. But thinking about some of those traits that we are now expecting in particular breeds, which require things like docking tails, cropping ears, and so forth. And the image that you see there, which are not my images, these are images I pulled actually from Google Images, but the images there on the right are of the breed showing, you know, with the ears cropped and the tail docked versus when they are not, right? And so I'm just trying to give you some examples of some of the selective pressures that we have put on dogs and that we are requiring or our expectations are for these animals to look and behave in particular ways. So go ahead and please advance the slide, which brings us to what will that look like in the future, right? So if we again think about what we see through the cartoon images that you will see, if you get an opportunity to explore the exhibit, but then also thinking about how our relationship with the human-dog relationship has changed over time, and what some of those effects have been, not only on human society, but certainly on the dog itself. I think that, you know, there's probably a lot for us that we need to consider as we move forward in this relationship. And, you know, making sure that we're always being considerate, not just of our own needs, but of the dog's needs as well. So with that, because I know we're running very long on time of our presentation, I do want to thank all of you for joining us this evening and for listening to us. And I do certainly want to, on behalf of Chair, thank Anne for the partnership here with the Billy Ireland Cartoon Museum, and then also certainly all of our presenters. So thank you very much. I know we bring you very different perspectives, so hopefully we can help with some Q&A at this point. So thank you, Anne.
Thank you to all of our presenters. At this time, I'm inviting our presenters to turn their cameras, and I'll ask you to unmute if you want to take a question. So let's see. Stephanie asks, can one of the speakers explain how some dogs and cats can indicate if a person has a certain disease or is seriously ill? There has recently been dogs who have been trained to sniff out who has COVID-19 to over 90% correct, ignoring masks from people who are healthy. Does anyone want to take that question?
So to answer that question, I don't really know how they can sniff out COVID, but I know that their ability there to detect scent and discriminate scent is, you know, so much better than us. And that's not just the bloodhounds and the sniffer dogs, that's all dogs. And so I'm not exactly, I'm not involved in their training. I don't know how they do it, but I know that we can't replicate what they do when it comes to distinguishing different odors. So.
And if I could just add on to that a little bit. So thank you, Dr. Parker. Yeah, because of their advanced olfactory system, I think that it does come down to training for particular scents, and to then be able to detect those, for example, you know, particular pheromones that are that you would have based on certain levels of glucose and so forth. But I would say also, just to throw in a little bit of thought of what I was just saying about the effect on the animal as well, because they do have such an advanced system, I think sometimes we don't recognize what some of the odors maybe in our own household, what that might be, and through the lens of the dog, if you will. So, you know, if you're cooking particular meals and so forth, you know, sometimes you think about, I don't know, cooking peppers and onions, right? Everybody knows that smell when you cook peppers and onions. Just think about what that it would be to an animal that has such an advanced olfactory system. So just also being a little bit sensitive, I guess, to you know, your canine companion that shares your house with you as well.
Just to add, I don't know, I have read that some of that work is being done, and I don't do that type of work myself, that type of training, but I'm familiar with many people who have taught dogs for detection for a variety of things. But I do know, from what I understand, I understand that some of those studies, I guess they've been working on with that, are not peer reviewed yet, as of yet. So I don't know exactly how well they were conducted at this time, although it does seem the initial findings are that dogs are very accurate at that. And I know they're doing it. Some of the work is being done with sweat samples. So scent detection of sweat samples to detect COVID. Again, I don't know the exact science behind that and how that works, but so I understand it's very promising in terms of detection, but it's certainly not something as of yet that I understand that can actually be used with accuracy, because they don't know exactly how truly accurate the work is.
Thank you. Let's see, here's one from David. Are there certain cartoon dogs that are more or less realistic in terms of the behaviors they demonstrate?
Well, I think that there are definitely certain dogs that are represented in the cartoons in the exhibit that would be very, very much accurate as far as the way that they would behave. And I'm coming back up to some of the other questions in the Q&A, asking about Pluto as an example. So you know, Pluto definitely is a dog and acts as a dog. You know, is not it does not talk like the other characters in Disney and so forth. So you know, that's an example of one of the cartoons in the exhibit that is definitely very dog-esque.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think what was interesting is there's so many different kinds of dogs and the roles that they play in the different comic strips. And it was fun putting the exhibit together and actually trying to figure out what the breeds are. You know, obviously Marmaduke is a Great Dane and Snoopy is a Beagle. And but there's certainly some. I think somebody asked, like, what is Goofy? And you know, I think like his first appearance, I think he was a hunting dog or something, but no specific breed. And the next thing you know, he's got clothes on and he's talking. And so I would categorize that as an anthropomorphic dog. But I would say in some of the adventure strips, like that example you showed of Mug from Dick Tracy, you know, the dogs are more realistic. I mean, they're acting like that type of dog would have acted. That was, I think he was a boxer.
Yeah, I definitely think we see, as far as like dog behavior that I recognize from dogs that I train, it's often the dogs who are been least anthropomorphized, I guess, that really kind of show what I consider real dog behavior. And even sometimes when they have the thought bubbles coming out of their head, there was one little cartoon, I don't think it's in the exhibit, but it reminded me of something that absolutely could be, where the little girl is saying to her dog, you know, are you bored? What do you want to do? And the dog's thought bubble is, I want to chase down a moose and eviscerate it. And the little girl says, you want to chase your ball? And the dog's like, yeah, that'll do. Right. And I thought that that's very much kind of describes the dog behavior. Like they want to go out and do these, you know, natural behaviors. And we're like, here, chase a ball 50 times. And then, so it just kind of really struck me as the difference between anthropomorphizing and what the dog might actually be thinking.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Let's see. Now Karen's asking, regarding cartoon dogs, which character was the first cartoon dog? I think this one's for Brian.
The first cartoon dog. Well, we did show that print from 1820 by George Cruikshank, which is the phrase that was just being popularized at that time, raining cats and dogs. And they're raining down from the sky. In terms of an ongoing character that was, you know, mostly before the advent of newspaper strips at the end of the 19th century, most of the cartoons were political in nature. So we have some examples where Abe Lincoln is talking to his generals and they're all depicted as dogs, but you know, they're not specific characters. I think one of the certainly one of the most memorable early characters is Tige from Buster Brown, who appeared around 1902. It's like you always get in trouble when you try to say first anytime, because somebody will always find an earlier example of it.
So if anyone does know of an earlier one, please send it to us. We'd love to see it. And I guess I have one more question for the group. I'm just curious to know if you've noticed any trends in, are some dog breeds more desirable to people because they've appeared in comic strips? Have you noticed that anything has really influenced, coming from the newspaper comic strips and comic books, like recently, that's made people have a specific desire for a specific breed or a behavior that might not be common to that breed, but is depicted in a story?
We've definitely seen through, I would say in cartoon movies, animation, we see a kind of a surge for certain breeds when, you know, 101 Dalmatians, you know, everybody then wants a Dalmatian as an example. So we definitely see different breeds that are kind of become a focus or a hot breed for a while. You know, Cocker Spaniels, when Lady and the Tramp was you know, popular, those sorts of things. So we definitely see that. As far as actual comic strips, I actually don't know the answer to that. I don't know that I've seen any data that would say that.
Yeah,
If somebody else knows. Yeah.
in comic strips, there's a lot of sheepdogs. Like Farley was a sheepdog, and of course we have in my comic strip High and Lois, Dog, DAWG, is a sheepdog, and they're just fun to draw, and they're kind of big, and little tiny dogs sometimes get lost in the composition. So just from the artist point of view, I mean, there are some dogs that are more fun to draw, I think.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us, and thanks to our panelists. And one more question that was asked. Kevin asked if dogs are allowed in the cartoon library, and I do want to say that unfortunately, we don't allow dogs in the museum unless they are a service animal. So if you are coming to visit the museum, please leave your dog at home.
So Anne, can I ask one quick question before we sign off? The video, because I know there was some questions about that I saw on chat, not in the Q&A, but about featuring more of the particular comics. Does the video that we did, is that accessible to people if they want to watch that video, the one that we just made recently?
Yes, that is available. I will send the link out to everyone who was in attendance, and I will re-promote that on social media as well.
Thank you. Yeah, so just for some of those, because I know people were asking specifically about more of the cartoons themselves. And so I just wanted to point that out, that we did do something like that as well. And hopefully it's available to them. So yeah, perfect. Thank you.
All right. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Take
Thank-
care.
Bye.